It's Friday, February 28th, 2025. Time for a Friday 5-Pack. Ask or tell me anything. And for the first time in the history of this podcast, let's read some hate mail. Next on the AM Update. Of course, the big news yesterday is Attorney General Pam Bondi releasing the Epstein files. And boy, howdy, let me tell you, it was a giant wet fart. That was not good. So far, let me get the story straight. They were given a number of binders. This is phase one of the rollout, supposedly, of the Epstein files. They gave these binders to a bunch of right-wing influencers. Don't have a problem with that. I really don't. Okay. If we were living in a country where the social compact were intact, that would be a little uncouth, but we're not. So I don't care that they're giving special access to friendly media. But anyway, they gave all these right-wing influencers a bunch of binders, and all of these binders contained pages upon pages upon pages of beep, 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 just redacted information. The information that we did get, according to sources that I trust, was not exactly helpful, relevant, really advances the story at all. I don't know what they were doing. I have my own theory on what happened here, but I want to let this play out a little bit longer. Now, Anna Paulina Luna, this caught my eye yesterday. Anna Paulina Luna, she was just appointed to head that special task force in the House of Representatives investigating the JFK, RFK, Epstein files, 9/11 files. She came out with this post on social media, quote, "I nor the task force were given or reviewed the Epstein documents being released today. A New York Post story just revealed that the documents will be simply Epstein's phone book. This is not what we or the American people asked for. Get us the information we asked for instead of leaking old info to press." Now, Attorney General Bondi, later in the day, announced that the FBI, her own employees, the FBI is a branch, or at least a subsidiary of the Justice Department, which she heads. She says the FBI is interfering with the release of the Epstein files. FBI Director Kash Patel came out and said, "We'll make sure that the FBI, if they are interfering, will not be interfering for long." So what a weird story. What a weird story that was yesterday. Now, number two, Iowa, my home state, has now become the first state in the country, or at least it will when this bill is codified into law, to remove language surrounding so-called gender identity from the Iowa Civil Rights Act. Yes. So what this does is it protects Iowans from specious applications of the Civil Rights Act in the name of gender. So no longer, it'll be soon in Iowa, no longer can you just say, "Hey, you got to let me into the bathroom. This is, my identity is protected under the Civil Rights Act in this here state." It's sure to be challenged in the court system, but that's a worthy challenge to take on. So that's, again, Iowa becoming the first state in the union to enact a law such as this, and a story to keep an eye on. And probably the biggest thing that I can see, from states, at the state level, removing gender identity as a protected class in their civil rights acts, Iowa could just be the first domino. Okay, these types of things are necessary to put peer pressure on other red states to follow through and do the same thing. No, you cannot. Civil Rights Act does not mean if you are a dude who feels pretty, you can just go to any bathroom you want. No, you can't sue under grounds that your gender identity is protected. If we want to do another Jack the Baker situation in Iowa, saying, "Hey, I'm a Muslim, atheist, transgender, lizard person. I want you to write that you affirm that on a wedding cake or a birthday cake." Nope, not going to be able to do that. So, like I said, this is going to go to the courts, but it's a worthy challenge nonetheless. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, here's story number 3, announced this week U.S. service members who are identifying as transgender or otherwise exhibit gender dysphoria and are hereby prohibited from military service unless they obtain an exemption, according to a Pentagon memo. The memo, revealed in a court filing on Wednesday night, details the Trump administration's new policy regarding so-called transgender individuals. The policy notes that such service members may be considered for waiver on a case-by-case basis, provided there is a compelling government interest. Service members who have a long history of cross-sex hormone therapy, see that as chemical castration, or a history of sex reassignment or genital reconstruction surgery, see that as meatball surgery in the name of gender, in the treatment for gender dysphoria, or in pursuit of sex transitions, are disqualified from military service. That is all according to this new memo released by Secretary of Defense Hegseth this week. So it seems like the promises to try to boot trainees out of the military, they're following through on that. I do get a little bit suspicious with that language of seeking an exemption, but this memo does make it clear in no uncertain terms. If you've been taking hormones, if you've been taking chemical castration, if you've pursued sex change surgery, meatball surgery in the name of gender, you are disqualified. This week, RFK Jr., new HHS secretary, he praised the restaurant chain Steak and Shake for being the first major restaurant to start to move away from using seed oils. Well, the COO of Steak and Shake joined Fox News this week to discuss more on the change.
We've actually been thinking about this for a while. Our owner, my boss, is a man named Sardar Biglari, and when he was a little boy, he went to Belgium and had fries and said these are the best fries I've ever had, and they were actually cooked in beef tallow. So he called me one time and said, why should Europeans have better fries than Americans? Like, we need to have the best. Steak and Shake's classic American brand. We can't let anybody beat us. We got to have the best fries. And we wanted to switch, I guess, years ago, but they couldn't get a chemical-free, additive-free, all-natural, pure beef tallow because they put defoaming agents and things. So he tells me we have to do beef tallow, but we have to do it all natural, no additives, no preservatives. And we found a supplier that could finally do that for us. And he said, we got to do it. We got to do it everywhere. And so we did.
Okay.
We RFK'd our fries.
Indeed. So all your locations by March 1st are going to have French fries in beef tallow. I know RFK Jr. not a fan of seed oils, but ultimately it comes down to, as you know, Daniel, it comes down to the taste. So does it taste as good as, one of those other fries that we have grown accustomed to?
They're so much better. We're actually famous for, as you mentioned, for our shoestring fries.
Right.
And these fries the same fry cooked in beef tallow is crispier, it's golden brown, it's absolutely delicious, and you're going to love them when you try them. You're not going to want to ever go back to the old way of doing fries.
That is Steak and Shake COO Daniel Edwards announcing that his company, his restaurant, is going to be moving to an all-natural beef tallow for frying their French fries. That's some really tremendous news. Let's go to the Land of Enchantment. This is our final story in the Friday 5-pack, where acclaimed and famed actor Gene Hackman was found dead at the age of 95 alongside his wife and their dog. Now, the circumstances around this death are somewhat mysterious. More on that in just a little bit. Gene Hackman was one of the greatest actors of his time or anyone's generation. He was an absolute powerhouse, adept at comedy as he was at drama. Very sad day. Loved Gene Hackman, just a giant of cinema.
Till I found out it was just that I was in Nebraska.
He saved my life. 30 years ago, I was knifed in a bazaar in Calcutta. He carried me in the hospital on his back.
Who stabbed you?
He did.
Gene Hackman dead at the age of 95. So what exactly happened? He and his wife dead, but also their dog dead as well. Well, here's this from KOB TV in Albuquerque.
They were dispatched to the home on Old Sunset Trail in Hyde Park. When they arrived, they found the actor, his wife Betsy Arakawa, and a dog all dead. It's not yet known how they died, but investigators do not suspect foul play. According to a search warrant, the fire department found no signs of carbon monoxide poisoning, and the New Mexico Gas Company did not see problems with the gas lines. Deputies are still investigating what happened.
Very weird indeed. So I don't know if there's a difference here. The latest report I saw, that police said there's no foul play suspected, but the latest update I also saw also said that it's being investigated as suspicious, or at least the circumstances are suspicious in Gene Hackman's death. Suicide doesn't really seem like a likely explanation. Who commits suicide at the age of 95? By the way, there's a question coming up in Ask or Tell Me Anything about suicide, a very morbid topic to talk about on a Friday morning, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Anyway, let's get to the rest of Ask or Tell Me Anything. Jared Ritchie says, this week you played the clip of Eric Adams. I couldn't help but think that Mayor Adams' voice is not too far in sound and cadence from the actor Tracy Morgan. Listen again and tell me you don't hear it. Dude, I know. I knew it sounded familiar. I knew that Eric Adams' voice absolutely sounded familiar, but we will listen to this over again.
You know, when Jesus was on the cross, he said, God, forgive them, for they know not what they do. All these Negroes who are asking me to step down, God, forgive them.
Yeah, and they do sound very familiar. I don't know if that's the Brooklyn accent, as I rolled my B there accidentally. I don't know if that's the Brooklyn, one of the borough accents. That's probably the biggest reason why it sounds familiar. But yeah, the cadence and the timbre and the pitch of their voices are very, very similar. Good observation, Jared. Tiny Johnny says, what is one theological take that when you hear it, you roll your eyes? So it's not so much of a theological take. I guess it is technically a theological take. But basically, whenever somebody says, well, God told me, ... usually that means that something really stupid is about to proceed and issue forth from their mouth. God told me, ... Now, that doesn't always mean that they think God told them in a vision or audibly told them something, but generally speaking, that's not a good sign that something really profound is about to come out of their mouth. Usually it's something either through an emotional experience, either they're going through a traumatic event or time in their lives. That's kind of what my inkling is here. That's kind of what I think is usually going on. Or they just ate some bad pizza last night, something like that. But usually when you hear that, especially in American Christendom, usually that's not a good sign. Debbie Sanford said, just a thought about Jake Tapper's book. Is it an autobiography? That's a good one. Yeah, so Jake Tapper's new book, Original Sin, about the decline of Biden's mental faculties and covering it up after he and his entire network spent the better part of 4.5, 5 years almost, completely dismissing, downplaying, chiding anyone who would suggest that that was the case. But yeah, Original Sin, the autobiography of Jake Tapper, that has a nice ring to it. Don Milne says, does everyone get the same ads on your program? If it's just me, I'm not sure if I should be amused or concerned that I keep getting that ad for pleasuring products. Keep up the great content, format, and presentation. Maybe screen the ads. I don't have any say on what ads are run on my show, really. Here's the good news, Don. Oh, I got good news and bad news. The bad news is that not everybody gets the same ads, okay? The good news is that I believe, unlike cookies on like web browsers, podcast ads don't work the same way. They're not based on other searches that you have done. So I think it's just a complete and total coincidence, incidence, that you're receiving advertisements for pleasuring products. I don't know what that is, but yeah, that's just a coincidence. Don't worry. Wolverine says, have you heard anything about these boycotts? So we answered this, I can't remember if we answered this a couple of weeks ago or not. I had not heard anything about these anti-DEI protests. Got that? Okay, I guess I could say pro-DEI protests and boycotts. So some lefty group, I don't know who's heading it up. It's just one of those things that just kind of seems to be conjured out of thin air. They're organizing a boycott of places like Walmart, because Walmart has indicated some tepid pulling back from DEI policies. So they are anti-DEI boycotts and protests. And so now there's counter anti-DEI boycotts, where people are encouraging others to go and shop at these giant corporations that have expressed tepid pulling back from DEI policies. It's kind of a mess, but I had not heard anything about these until late last week. I asked my wife if this was something that was, popping up on her algorithm, and she said she had never heard of that either. All right, Ryan is back. What is your take on the suicide debate and Christians? Would a true believer in Christ commit suicide? Premeditated murder without the opportunity for repentance? That's a tough question, obviously. That's why there's a debate surrounding it. Now, I believe that once you are saved, you cannot lose that salvation. And people who fall into what Catholics would call, I think it's mortal sin, we would say on the Protestant side, or at least I would from my perspective, that they were probably, and are unrepentant about their sin as well, they were probably never saved to begin with, because they're showing their true fruit. They might be able to preach a sermon really well, or write really well, or speak really well, but if they fall into mortal sin and there's no repentance, that probably is a good indication of where their heart truly was, where the posture of their heart truly was. Now, can you commit a sin as egregious as suicide? And it is a sin. It is a sin against those around you and God. Is that an indication then of the latter category that I was talking about? Is that an indication that you were never saved to begin with? I happen to think this is probably a case-by-case basis. If you ask me specifics of a case, I could probably give you a more specific answer. But generally speaking, if you commit an act of premeditated murder, which is what you're doing with suicide, you're just doing immeasurable harm to your family, and you're sinning against your God. You're hurting his heart. Where is your heart at in doing that? Now, if it's a situation, again, you'd have to give me specific situations, specific scenarios here. But I kind of come down on if this is just kind of an outpouring of things that you've always been struggling with, and this is a major infraction, where was your heart to begin with? So I know I'm not trying to shirk the question, but I honestly, truly believe that it's probably on a case-by-case basis. If you forced me to provide an answer, generally speaking, as sad as it is, generally speaking, most of the time, suicide is probably an indication of a heart that, yes, may be plagued with some very serious hurt. Some very, very serious wounds and scars from the past, however those wounds and scars appeared. But it's probably indication of a heart that was never truly right with God to begin with. And I hate saying that. But if you forced me to provide an answer, I'd say most of the time, suicide is probably falls into that category. All right, when we come back for the first time ever in the history of the AM Update, we're reading some hate mail. That's coming up next. All right, back for one final segment this week. This pokey little podcast is big enough that we now receive hate mail, but small enough where I can't read it like every week. I have to wait for a few months for this to accumulate. I have given out the email address for the AM Update like maybe 3 times. Okay, I've probably given out more than that. That's just an exaggeration. AaronMcIntire.update@gmail.com. I've given that out like 3 times, but apparently all of the most, let's say, vocal critics of this here little podcast, they all wrote it down the 3 times that I gave it out. All right, without further ado, let's begin with, who is it? Matt in Ohio. I tried listening to your garbage podcast, the AM Update, but it's unbearable. All you do is drool over Donald Trump like some lovesick puppy. You have a shrine to him in your basement. Your blind devotion to that clown is embarrassing. It's clear you're just a shill with no spine. Wow. Okay. Miss KL is next. Dear Aaron McIntire, your podcast is a disgrace. Every episode of AM Update is just you kissing Trump's ring and ignoring reality. Do you ever get tired of defending that egomaniac? Why don't you just call it the Donald Trump Love Hour? Well, first of all, this podcast is a half hour at most. So that's one problem. Should we read one more? This one was a little harder to read. This person is spelling challenged. This is Mike. Mike says, AM Update, your obsession with that orange buffoon is sickening. Why is everybody focused on Donald Trump with these? I don't even think I'm like that lovey. I'm very optimistic. And I'm singing I totally admit that, singing a much different tune about Donald Trump than I was, about a year and a half ago for sure. I don't think I'm like filleting him or anything. I don't know. But everybody who has registered some hate mail since I went back to November, everybody who's registering hate mail since November seems to think that I'm just the biggest Donald Trump fanboy of all time. That brings me to Dirk, who has this. Initially, AM Update was a good substitute for those who missed Aaron's day job, but in his expanded version with more ad breaks, it's becoming a rough listen. Well, first of all, by the end of today, we will have had the best month on the AM Update in about a year, actually over a year. And last time I checked, February is the shortest month every year. Dirk continues, as his drive to stretch the material. Many stories are like this. Okay, let's stop real quick. First of all, this is not a substitute for what I do for my day job. I've worked very, very hard to make sure the format is different. And I'd say 99% of the time it is. Now, the topics covered, incidentally, sometimes there's going to be a lot of overlap. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes the way in which I cover things are intentionally different, but I work, especially for legal reasons, I work very, very hard to make sure that the format is different, and it is 99% of the time. But in his expanded version with more ad breaks, okay, well, I was just looking at a show clock for a half-hour show on syndicated radio, and for a half-hour show on syndicated radio, there's always at least 8 to 10 minutes of ads. Okay, with my podcast, there's 4 minutes maximum. See, the reason I'm reading Dirk's note here is that I thought it would actually be, unlike most trolls, I thought it would actually be instructive for the audience to kind of get a sneak peek behind the scenes of why I do what I do on the AM Update and for whom. So already a couple of things that need to be clarified in the first paragraph. Anyway, Dirk continues and says, in his drive to stretch the material, many stories are like, Aaron leads with what the clip will say, plays clip of someone saying something dumb. Aaron repeats the setup and what the clip speaker said as if we were too dumb to remember the setup and understand what the clip said. Dirk, congratulations, you have discovered broadcast news. I do this, and I haven't changed. I've done this very intentionally since the outset of the AM Update. Exactly what you just described there. The AM Update, I described this for a fairly quick morning news update for people who are getting ready or going to work. So if you're going to work, what are you most likely doing? Unless you live in a huge city. You're most likely driving, which means what? You're very distracted. You're dodging potholes. The guy in the Ram 1500 just cut you off. You're trying to get your exit. There's a lot of things that are distracting you. And studies have shown that 20 to 30 seconds of a speaker speaking, people start to tune out. So people who come to this podcast, they already know me. They know my voice. But when I play clips, when I play actualities, after 20 to 25 seconds, especially if you're distracted on your way to work, you might forget who's speaking or what they're talking about. So I'm very intentional on purpose of making sure that I set up clearly who is speaking, unless I'm doing like a series of quick hitting items, but most of the time, set up who is speaking, what they're speaking about, without actually repeating their words, play the clip, and then I reset gently, hopefully not in a disorienting way, reset what just happened. I don't do this because I think you're dumb. I do this because I respect you. And I respect what you come to the AM update for, which is news in a concise manner, but also news in a clear manner. And making sure that everything that's used, every actuality that's used, is set up, delivered, and recapped in a way that provides clarity to the message that I, or the actuality, is trying to convey. Okay? So Dirk wraps this up by saying he either believes his listeners are morons or doesn't have enough material to fill the expanded runtime. Well, Dirk, the day that you sent this to me, I went back and looked. I had 10 items plus the opening out-of-context mini montage. 10 items plus the mini out-of-context montage in the first 8.5 minutes. That's actually, if anything, that's way too condensed. And I need to stretch it out a little bit more. So I'm not sure what show you're listening to. So Dirk continues on. He either believes his listeners are morons or doesn't have enough material to fill the expanded runtime. I suspect the latter. But either shorten the show to match the amount of content or add more stories. Most days, buddy, I've got like 10 to 15 stories. So I'm not really sure what you're looking for. You might have to find a different podcast that somebody does for absolutely free. No ad breaks, that isn't clear about clips that they play because they are afraid of making Dirk feel dumb or moronic, and has 20 stories in 8 minutes instead of 10. So I'm sorry, Dirk. I guess I have fallen short of the mark there. That's going to do it for Friday edition of the AM Update. When we come back tomorrow for No Suck Saturday, it's going to be another edition of Ask Izzy. Ask a nurse who knows. Any question about health, fitness, the healthcare industry, anything you'd like. We've got 3 questions lined up. You can ask those questions if you have them over at AskIzzyNSS@gmail.com. Ask Izzy, I-Z-Z-Y, AskIzzyNSS@gmail.com. We'll also, of course, have 5 stories we think objectively don't suck. That's coming up tomorrow on the AM Update, No Suck Saturday. If you don't catch that, have a great weekend. Back at it again on Monday.